You're listening to the Telltale channel. Don't forget to check me out on all social media: Patreon, Twitter, Teespring, and Etsy. All links can be found in the description or on my website, telltaleatheist.com. So the next article I'm going to take a look at is on the Friendly Atheist website. The title is Kenneth Copeland, Christians Who Don't Vote for Trump Are Guilty of Murder, quote unquote. So let's give this a read and see what it has to say. Christian scam evangelist Kenneth Copeland wants you to know that if you vote for Joe Biden, you're practically a murderer. Copeland made the comments to Charisma's Stephen Strang during a podcast on Monday. I actually have the podcast clip here, so let's pull it up and give it a listen.
You know, he's been a great friend of Christians, yet some Christians nitpick and say he's not a nice guy and they shouldn't vote for him. But the alternative is socialism. It really is socialism.
I'm assuming that this is Stephen Strang. Obviously, this guy's talking about Donald Trump. They say the alternative is socialism. No, that is a logical leap if I've ever heard one. That is actually a propaganda technique, too. There are like a list of hundreds of these propaganda techniques, kind of like logical fallacies. They are very similar in their own way. Propaganda techniques are basically logical fallacies used to spread information or spread misinformation in some way. I should really cover different propaganda techniques that are used by advertisers and politicians and cults and things like that. I think that'd be fascinating to cover like a list of like 10 of them per video or something like that. I really should do that. Anyways, what this guy is saying about Joe Biden being a socialist or pushing socialism, completely absurd. That's completely absurd. He is using it to scare his listeners into voting for Donald Trump. Well, nobody wants socialism. Have you seen what socialism has done around the world? They're also harnessing the whole Red Scare thing. Like back in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, I think, there was a lot of anti-communism propaganda going around. Anti-communism, anti-Russia, anti-socialism, and a lot of the older people, who are older than, say, 30 or 40, probably remember some of this stuff. Perceptions about socialism or communism or whatever else were way, way worse, way more extreme back when the government was really pushing this stuff. So he's using that to try to get older millennials and boomers, basically, to vote for Trump at any cost because of their fear of socialism. Let's continue listening.
My listeners, the people who donate to your ministry, the people who read Charisma magazine, most of them are going to vote for Donald Trump. They just vote for the conservative candidate every time it rolls around. But I also see a lot of apathy. A lot of Christians aren't registered to vote. We're afraid that a lot of Christians will stay home instead of vote. Why do you think there's such apathy in the body of Christ?
Before we actually get into Kenneth Copeland's response, which is coming up next, I just want to point out, if you aren't voting but you are Christian, or if there's question as to whether or not you're going to vote but you're a Christian, then you're probably going to vote Democrat. The enthusiasm comes in when you mix religion and politics, which, by the way, I've mentioned, is a point on the fascist scale. If religion and politics are intertwined inextricably, it's a red flag that you may be entering a fascist state. The Republican Party at this point, not conservatism, but the Republican Party specifically, is basically made up of the evangelical Christian voting bloc. It is just evangelical Christians and how they want the country to be run. And we know that extreme evangelical Christians want the country to be a Christian nationalist state. They want teachers to lead students in mandatory public prayer and things like that. They want it to be like the Christian version of Saudi Arabia. That's the type of state that a lot of evangelical voters are reaching for. Anyway, let's continue listening and see what Kenneth Copeland's response was to this. I'm going to step back a little bit, though.
Stay home instead of vote. Why do you think there's such apathy in the body of Christ?
Lack of knowledge. The young ones do not know what socialism is. They don't have a clue. At the same time, they do not know what capitalism is. So they're in this never land, and so they just listen to the ones that are doing the most talking. Let me say something about this, Stephen. I've been around a long time. I'm 83 years old, and I've seen a whole lot come down the road over the years. Any Christian who stays at home and doesn't vote is guilty of murder. Every person who votes for someone knowing that they push for abortion and to kill a baby anytime they want to kill it, they're just as guilty as the doctor that performed the abortion. There's no way around that.
Obviously, no Christian wants to be guilty of murder, and that logical leap has already been in their minds since they were children. Like with Jehovah's Witnesses, we call it blood guilt. Jehovah's Witnesses call it blood guilt. You can be completely innocent in a situation, like maybe you were walking by somebody and you startle them and they trip and fall and break their neck. You're blood guilty for that. That's murder in Jehovah's Witnesses' eyes. There is redemption from that. You can come back from that. It's not impossible. But they lean into this blood guilt, this murder thing heavily. A lot of Christian denominations do. And that's what Kenneth Copeland is doing here. He's leaning into the idea that he's placing extreme importance on an event or idea. If you don't vote the way I want you to vote, then you might as well have killed this person yourself, basically. That's what he's doing. It's an appeal to emotion, fallacy, and propaganda technique. Like I said, propaganda and logical fallacies go hand in hand in a lot of ways. And it's a fear tactic. So let's continue reading the article by Hemant Mehta and see what it says. This is a quote from the clip we just listened to. I'll just read the highlighted part. This is Copeland. Any Christian who stays at home and doesn't vote is guilty of murder. Every person who votes for someone knowing that they push for abortion and to kill a baby anytime they want to kill it, they're just as guilty as the doctor that performed it. There's no way around it. This is Hemant Mehta speaking. Somehow, the nearly 180,000 COVID deaths under the Trump administration are entirely forgivable, but the inevitable lower abortion rates under a Democratic president still make Biden supporters stone-cold killers. The idea that Biden, the most moderate, milquetoast candidate Democrats could have chosen, is some kind of left-wing socialist is laughable. I wish he was. He's not. This is how conservative Christians operate, though. Everyone, even slightly liberal, is deemed a radical socialist and a baby killer, regardless of the facts. They do this because it's an us versus them mentality, an us versus them attitude. They want to have an enemy that they can focus on and attack. And one enemy that basically the entire Republican Party or the entire evangelical voting bloc hates is communists and socialists. That's why they have to paint Biden that way, even though he's not, because it's the best way to scare people into being enthusiastic about voting. Since we're on this subject, I just pulled a picture up. If you're listening on the audio podcast, I'll describe what I have up here. It's a picture of a display that can be found at the Holocaust Museum. It's early warning signs of fascism, so that we never forget and we can avoid repeating history. Let me give you the points on this poster, basically. This reminder of what fascism is and how it creeps into a society. Powerful and continuing nationalism. Disdain for human rights. Identification of enemies as a unifying cause. Supremacy of the military. rampant sexism, controlled mass media, obsession with national security, religion and government are intertwined, corporate power protected and labor power is suppressed, disdain for intellectuals and the arts, obsession with crime and punishment, rampant cronyism and corruption, and fraudulent elections. Is any of this sounding familiar to you guys? Does the U.S. meet any of those points at all? Like, even a couple of them? What about religion and politics being intertwined? Does it meet that one? Does it meet the rampant cronyism and corruption one? What about fraudulent elections? Trump's been talking about that nonstop. Most people can get on board with at least a few of these points. Something needs to be done. This is a serious situation we're in right now as U.S. citizens. Something needs to be done to stop it going down this path. It's extremely disturbing. Back to Hemant Mehta. You have to be willfully stupid to buy into that labeling, but if you're the sort of Christian who believes Kenneth Copeland about anything, you're almost certainly in that camp. And unfortunately, Kenneth Copeland is the type of person who is followed and listened to by the vast majority of the evangelical voting bloc, aka the Republican Party, sadly. Sometimes I wonder if we're winning this fight, but one day at a time, all we can do is keep fighting. All we can do is keep fighting.